I want a divorce. My husband said it on our 15th anniversary trip, somewhere between the room service breakfast and the moment I was supposed to open his gift. We were in Charleston, in a hotel room with a view of the harbor that he'd booked 6 months in advance. Or so I thought. I remember the smell of coffee on the tray between us, the little silver dome still covering my eggs, and the way he wouldn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the window instead, like the harbor was more interesting than 15 years of his life. I laughed. I actually laughed, because for half a second I thought it was a joke. The kind of dark joke he sometimes made, when he was nervous about something else entirely. But his face didn't move. His jaw was set the way it got when he was negotiating a contract he'd already decided to walk away from. That's not funny? I said. I'm not joking. We'd flown to Charleston the night before. We'd walked along the Battery in the evening light, eaten shrimp and grits at a restaurant he'd picked out himself, and he'd held my hand the whole way back to the hotel like nothing was wrong. I keep thinking about that hand-holding. How easy it was for him. How practiced. His name was Mark. Is Mark. I have to remind myself sometimes that he's still walking around somewhere, still breathing, still existing, because in my head that morning split my life into two separate people who happened to share a name. We'd met when I was 26 at a friend's barbecue in Austin, both of us holding paper plates we didn't know what to do with. He made me laugh within 10 minutes. We got married 2 years later in a backyard, with string lights and a borrowed sound system, and for a long time I told people we had the kind of marriage that made other people roll their eyes a little, because we still liked each other. We still made each other coffee in the morning without being asked. We still texted dumb things to each other during the day. That had changed, slowly, over maybe the last year and a half. I told myself it was the new job. He'd taken a position at a logistics company in Houston that had him traveling for client relationships, which in hindsight is one of the emptiest phrases I have ever let myself believe. He started leaving the house earlier, coming home later. His phone, which used to sit face up on the kitchen counter while he cooked, started living face down, and then started living in his pocket, even when he was just sitting on the couch. When I brought it up to my sister, she said the thing everyone says. He's probably just stressed. Men get weird when they're stressed at work. My mother-in-law said something similar at Thanksgiving, half joking, that Mark had always been a little squirrely when he had a big deal coming up. And I let myself fold into that explanation because the alternative was too big to hold. There were other things, small ones, that I filed away without looking at them too closely. A receipt from a steakhouse in Houston for 2 people, dated on a night he told me he'd eaten alone at the airport. A gym membership renewal that didn't match the gym 15 minutes from his office. The way he started locking his laptop screen even when I walked past, a habit he never used to have. Each one alone meant nothing. Together, if I'd let myself look, they meant everything. So when he said, I want a divorce in that hotel room with the harbor view, some small, exhausted part of me wasn't entirely surprised. The rest of me was in free fall. Why? I said. Not even a full question. I didn't have the breath for the question mark. I've been unhappy for a while. You've been unhappy. This isn't sudden for me, even if it's sudden for you. I remember staring at the little silver dome over my eggs and thinking absurdly that I should eat before they got cold. Like my body was trying to find one normal thing to hold on to while the rest of the room tilted sideways. Is there someone else? I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation was its own answer, the same way it would be later, in a kitchen 400 miles away, when I asked him a different version of the same question and got the same half-second of silence before the lie. That's not what this is about, he said. I want to tell you I stood up and threw something, that I said something sharp and unforgettable. But the truth is I just sat there with my hands in my lap, feeling the air conditioning hum, watching a man I had built an entire life with talk about the architecture of his unhappiness, like he was presenting a quarterly report. He told me he'd already spoken to a lawyer. He told me, gently, like it was a kindness, that he thought it would be better if I flew home on my own flight the next morning instead of the one we'd booked together, so he could have some space to think. He told me the house, our house, the one we'd bought together in the suburbs north of Houston, the one with the kitchen I'd picked the backsplash for. He told me he'd figure out the logistics once we were both back. I flew home alone. I sat in a middle seat between a man who fell asleep with his mouth open and a teenager watching something on her phone with no headphones, and I stared at the seat back in front of me for 2 hours and 19 minutes without seeing it at all. Mark texted me that night. Short, businesslike. He said he'd be staying in Houston a few extra days to clear his head and that we should talk properly when he got back. I sat alone in our house, with his shoes still by the door and his coffee mug still in the drying rack. And I went through 15 years of photographs on my phone, like I was looking for the exact moment something had broken, as if I could find it, label it, and somehow reverse engineer my way back to before. 3 days later, he came home and told me he was staying at his brother's place for now, to give us both room to think. He packed a duffel bag while I sat on the edge of our bed and watched him fold t-shirts I had bought him, and neither of us said much of anything. Before he left, he paused at the bedroom door and said, "I do still care about you. I just don't think I'm in love with you anymore." I have turned that sentence over so many times since then that I could probably draw you a diagram of it. I do still care about you. As if that were the part that mattered. As if a man who still cared about you wouldn't have a receipt from a Houston steakhouse. For 2 on a night, he said he ate alone. For about 2 weeks, I lived in a kind of suspended fog. I went to work. I'm a dental hygienist, and I will say this for muscle memory. It kept me upright on days when nothing else did. I came home to an empty house and ate cereal standing at the counter, because cooking for one felt like its own kind of grief. My best friend, Carla, came over most evenings and just sat with me, sometimes not talking at all, which I think she understood was more useful than advice. It was on a Tuesday, almost 3 weeks after Charleston, that I drove back to the house in the middle of the day to grab something I'd forgotten. My late grandmother's jewelry box. The one thing in that house I could not stand the idea of losing if things went the way I feared they might. Mark wasn't supposed to be there. He'd told me, in one of our stilted, logistics-only phone calls, that he was staying at his brother Tyler's place and would let me know when he was ready to sit down and talk about next steps. I let myself in with my own key, into my own house, and I heard a woman laughing in the kitchen. I want to describe that sound to you the way it actually was. Not the way it sounds dramatic in hindsight. It was an easy laugh, a comfortable one. Not the laugh of a guest. The laugh of someone who knew where the glasses were kept. I stood in the front hallway for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 4 seconds. My heart was doing something strange and fast in my chest. Some animal part of me already knew exactly what I was going to find, and some other part of me, the part that had spent 15 years building a life on the assumption of good faith, was still hoping it was Carla. It was not Carla. I walked toward the kitchen, and there, sitting at my kitchen island with a mug of my coffee in her hands, wearing one of Mark's old college sweatshirts like she'd raided his closet 100 times before, was a woman I had never seen in my life. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, comfortable in a way that made my stomach drop. Because comfortable meant practiced, and practiced meant this was not the first time. She saw me first. Her face went through about 3 expressions in half a second. Confusion, recognition, and then something close to panic. She set the mug down so fast that coffee sloshed over the rim onto my counter, the counter I'd picked the granite for. "Oh my God," she said, to no one, to the room. Mark came around the corner from the hallway a second later, in sweatpants, in his own home. In the home he had told me to give him space to think away from, and the look on his face was not shame. It was inconvenience. He looked at me the way you look at a delivery that arrived early. You weren't supposed to. He started, and then stopped, because there was nowhere good for that sentence to go. I remember being almost calm, Not the calm of peace, the calm of shock, the kind where your body just stops giving you feelings for a minute, because it doesn't know which one to hand you first. "This is Tyler's place you've been staying at?" I said. He didn't answer that. The woman. I would later learn her name was Jenna, that she worked with him, that she'd transferred to the Houston office around the same time his client relationships travel had started. Stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped the floor. "I should go," she said to him, not to me. "You don't have to," he started. "I should go," she said again, firmer, and grabbed a denim jacket off the back of a chair I didn't recognize, and a tote bag that was sitting by the kitchen door, like it had been sitting there for a while, like its owner came and went on a schedule. She walked past me toward the front door, eyes down, and I watched her go without a single word, because I genuinely did not know what to say to a stranger wearing my husband's sweatshirt in my kitchen at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The door closed. It was just the two of us. "How long?" I said. Not a question again. A demand wearing a question's clothes. He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit I used to find endearing. "A few months." I knew immediately that was a lie, the way you know water is cold before you've fully stepped in it. "How long, Mark?" He looked at the floor. "Almost a year. A year. A year of steakhouse receipts and locked laptops and gym memberships at a gym he didn't go to. A year of me telling my sister he was just stressed. A year of him kissing me goodbye in the mornings and driving, presumably, somewhere that was not always the airport. I was going to tell you," he said. "After the trip." I didn't want to ruin the trip. I almost laughed again, the same disbelieving laugh from the hotel room. He had ended our marriage at breakfast on our anniversary, and somehow still believed he'd protected something by waiting until after the shrimp and grits. "You didn't want to ruin the trip," I repeated. "I'm sorry it happened like this." "Like what, Mark?" "Like me finding out you've had a girlfriend living in my house for who knows how long?" He didn't answer that either. Instead, his eyes drifted, just for a second, to a stack of folders sitting on the far end of the kitchen island, half covered by a grocery store flyer, like someone had tried to hide them in plain sight. I noticed the way his whole body shifted slightly, angling itself between me and that stack of paper, and that was the thing that told me there was more here than a girlfriend. "What are those?" I said. "Nothing. Just paperwork." "What paperwork?" He hesitated again. That hesitation, I was learning, was the most honest thing about him. I walked past him before he could decide what to do about it, and I pulled the folders out from under the flyer. Inside were printouts from our joint investment account, a spreadsheet, professionally formatted, listing the house, the cars, our retirement accounts, even my grandmother's old savings bonds that had been sitting untouched in a safety deposit box for a decade. There was a printed emailed chain with a divorce attorney's letterhead at the top, dated almost 4 months back. There was a second printed email about refinancing the house solely in his name, dated even earlier than that. 4 months. He had been meeting with a divorce attorney for 4 months before he ever said the word divorce to me. He had been building a plan for our money, our house, our life, while I was still texting him drive safe before his business trips. "You've been planning this," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. I needed to understand my options, your options. While I had no idea anything was wrong. While I was defending you to my own sister. He didn't say anything to that. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't make it worse, and for once, he seemed to understand that. I did the only thing that felt like it mattered in that moment. I took out my phone and photographed every page, the spreadsheet, the attorney's emails, the refinancing proposal, all of it, while he stood there and watched me do it. "What are you doing?" he said. "Protecting myself," I said. "Since apparently you've had a 4-month head start." Something in his face changed then. Not guilt, exactly. More like the first flicker of a man realizing the version of this conversation he'd rehearsed in his head wasn't the one happening in front of him. I didn't stay to argue about it. I took my grandmother's jewelry box, the thing I'd actually come for, and I walked out of that house with my photos and my fury and absolutely nothing else. Because I knew, standing in that kitchen, that anything I said in that moment would be wasted on a man who had been quietly preparing for this exit for 4 months while I was still planning anniversary trips. I drove to Carla's place because I genuinely did not trust myself to be alone yet. I sat on her couch and told her everything in pieces, out of order, the way trauma comes out, and she didn't say, "I told you so," even though I half expected her to, because she had, gently, mentioned more than once over the last year that something about Mark's schedule didn't add up. Instead, she just made me tea I didn't drink and let me cry into a couch cushion until I ran out of tears for the night. The next morning, with a clearer head and a much colder heart, I called a divorce attorney of my own. Her name was Renata Castillo, recommended by a coworker who'd gone through her own divorce 2 years earlier, and within 20 minutes on the phone, I understood something I hadn't let myself understand the day before. Texas is a community property state. Everything acquired during the marriage, the house, the joint accounts, the retirement contributions, even some of his business bonuses, was, legally, half mine, regardless of whose name was on the paperwork, regardless of what spreadsheet he'd drawn up with his attorney. He could plan all the refinancing schemes he wanted. The law didn't care about his 4-month head start. Renata also told me something that stuck with me through every difficult month that followed. That infidelity itself doesn't usually move the needle much in a no-fault divorce state like Texas, but dissipation of marital assets, spending shared money on an affair, hiding assets, transferring property without consent, absolutely can. The steakhouse dinners, the hotel rooms in Houston that weren't business trips, possibly even money that had gone toward an apartment or gifts for Jenna. All of it, Renata said, could become relevant, and all of it, she said, we were going to find. I want to tell you the next few months were a straight line from devastated to triumphant. But that's not how it works. There were nights I sat in our half-empty house, because I stayed. I want to be clear about that. I did not leave the house I had built a life in just because he'd decided to detonate that life. There were nights I sat on the floor of the closet, because it was the only room that still smelled like the version of him I used to love. And I cried in a way that felt like it had no bottom. But there were also days that felt like getting my spine back one vertebra at a time. The day Renata's investigator found a lease agreement for a 1-bedroom apartment in Houston, signed 9 months earlier in Mark's name, with rent paid out of an account he'd opened without telling me, funded in part by a transfer from our joint savings that he'd labeled, almost comically, car repair. The day I found out from a mutual friend that Jenna had been introduced to Mark's parents at a company holiday party 7 months ago as his girlfriend, while I was sitting at home wrapping Christmas presents for both of our families like an idiot. The day his mother, who I had genuinely loved and who genuinely loved me back, called me in tears to apologize because apparently she hadn't known the full timeline either and felt sick about the holiday party once she put it together. The story didn't stay contained to our 2 households for long. Mark worked in a mid-sized company where everyone knew everyone. And once the pieces started fitting together, the apartment, the transferred funds, the timeline that didn't match what he'd told people, his version of events, the one where he was simply unhappy for a while and things had drifted apart mutually, started to fall apart in front of his colleagues, his friends, even some of his own family. People who had only ever heard his side, the soft, blameless version, started hearing mine. And mine had receipts, literally. 6 months in, we sat across from each other and our attorneys in a conference room in downtown Houston. And the man who had once told me he didn't want things to get messy sat through a settlement negotiation that was, by every account Renata gave me afterward, about as messy as it gets. He kept the apartment in his name. I kept the house, the whole house, no buyout required. Because the dissipation claims around the secret savings transfers gave Renata enough leverage to negotiate it outright. I kept my full half of the retirement accounts, plus an adjustment for the money he'd quietly funneled toward his affair over the better part of a year. My grandmother's savings bonds, which he had at one point listed on that spreadsheet as a joint asset to be split, were ruled separately and entirely mine, the way they always should have been. He didn't get to keep his pride either. Not really. Word got around. The same colleagues who used to invite him to golf on Saturdays started keeping a polite distance. Jenna, I heard through the same grapevine, left the company a few months after the divorce was finalized. Whether because of the awkwardness or because she'd seen, up close, exactly how easily a man who plans an exit in secret might one day plan another one. I genuinely don't know. And honestly, I stopped caring about the answer. I want to tell you about the morning, almost a year after Charleston, when I stood in my kitchen. My kitchen. The one with the backsplash I'd picked, the one that was now entirely, legally, completely mine, and made coffee for exactly one person, and realized I wasn't dreading it anymore. I'd gone back to therapy that spring, something I'd put off out of some misplaced sense that I should be able to handle it alone. And my therapist, a quiet, sharp woman named Dr. Whitfield, said something to me in one of our sessions that I still think about. She said that betrayal doesn't just break the present. It tries to break your past too. It makes you go back through every good memory looking for the lie hidden inside it. And the work, she said, wasn't pretending those 15 years hadn't been real. The work was learning to hold both things at once. That the early years had been genuinely good, and that the man who lived them with me had still been capable of what came after. I repainted the bedroom that summer, a deep, warm green I'd always wanted, and Mark had always vetoed because he thought it was too dark. I took an actual vacation. Alone to the Gulf Coast, just me and a paperback and a beach chair, and I did not spend a single minute of it waiting for someone else's phone to buzz. I started taking a pottery class on Wednesday nights with Carla. Something so ordinary and so mine that it felt like a small act of defiance every single week. People ask me sometimes, the few who know the whole story, whether I regret not seeing it sooner, the receipts, the locked laptop, the gym membership that didn't add up. I used to carry that question like a stone in my chest. I don't anymore. I trusted my husband for 15 years because that's what you're supposed to do when you build a life with someone. And the fact that he spent the last year of it lying to my face says nothing about my judgment and everything about his character. He thought he was the one walking away clean. New apartment, new girlfriend. A tidy little spreadsheet of assets he assumed he'd quietly carry off while I was still grieving the marriage I thought we had. Instead, he walked out with half of what he came in with and a reputation that followed him into every room he used to feel comfortable in. I walked out with my house, my grandmother's bonds, my friends, my name still attached to a life I had actually built with my own two hands. He lost a wife who would have stood beside him through almost anything. I lost a husband who was never really standing beside me at all. Not for that last year, maybe longer. Only one of us had something real to grieve. And by the time the green paint dried on my bedroom walls, I finally understood it wasn't me.